at 10:20 or a little bit after. Today I have Danny with me, and we're going to go a little bit on intermission, and we'll see how this goes. So first, Danny, if you can just give us a little background, prior to intermission, what were you doing? Just twiddling your thumbs, or were you keeping busy doing something else?
Well, I wasn't doing diddly squats, if that's what you're asking. What a great T-shirt. I love a good T-shirt. How about I just go ahead and say what I'm doing now, because it's basically what I was doing then, except for you add intermission.
Okay.
I was serving at New Paradigm Christian Church with Jerry Sizemore, and I was on staff with him. I still am on staff with him, but I'm on staff in a different position now. I am now considered to be the missionary in residence. And one of the cool things was New Paradigm hired me way back in the day, and they wanted me to be able to continue to do a spiritual formation ministry that I was working in with ministers. So they wanted me to be able to have the opportunity to take ministers on retreats. Sometimes I do one-on-one retreats, one-on-two retreats, those kind of things. I've taken people up into the UP on retreats. Sometimes we'll just go to a monastery, somewhere in Indiana or who knows where. So I'd been leading these retreats and all this kind of stuff for a long time. And we'd kind of maybe gotten away from some of that. And they moved me back to missionary in residence because I don't just work at the church. Since 2009, I have been the chaplain at 3 Midas automotive stores. And what's really funny is it has a direct connection to Lake James. My boss used to own the Angola Midas as well. He no longer owns the Angola Midas, and they sold off their Bloomington store. But I work at the 3 Indianapolis area stores, Carmel, Castleton, and Fishers. It was funny how I got that job. I was working at Shepherd Community, and there's this program called Truth at Work, and they were talking about how Christian businesses need to bring in Christian principles into their workplace, and they were talking about how certain organizations are actually hiring chaplains. And my boss, who owned these Midas stores, happened to be at a table with Jay Height, who's the executive director of Shepherd Community in Indianapolis, and he said to him, you don't know a minister who doesn't look like a minister who could hang out with my guys, do you? And he goes, I do. And he slid my number.
Who did he have in mind?
Well, yeah. And he goes, he slid a number across, he's got long hair, he's got a long beard, that kind of stuff. And yeah, feel free to have a conversation with him. And in 2009, they hired me, and I've been working there ever since. And this is what's kind of interesting, too. My relationship with my boss there has changed. Basically, I would go away on sabbatical. I've had 2 sabbaticals, 2009, 2016. And he said, you're going away on sabbatical. I don't have to pay you, right? And I go, you're right. You don't have to pay me if you don't want to. And so he didn't pay me. So when I got the job at Intermission, this gap year program that you've already heard about with Chris, and you'll hear more about from me today, and a little bit different from me probably, I said, remember, I'm going away. I'll be gone for 4 months or so, and you don't have to pay me. And he goes, what if I want to pay you? I said, well, I'm not going to turn down your check. If you want to pay me, you're more than welcome to pay me. And so he has continued to pay me. Now this year, with the way things have been going, with the price of gas, I don't know, maybe he won't pay me this year, but that's okay too. Once during COVID, he said, Danny, I really can't afford to pay you, and so you don't have to come. And I said, look, can I keep coming? And he goes, I would love for you to keep coming. I said, well, then I'm coming, and we won't worry about the money. Because I'm telling you something, the relationships I have with those guys absolutely transform my life. We need more relationships outside the walls of the church. And I'm going to tell you something, when I go into Midas, those are pretty much all relationships with people outside the church. The people who have a church background don't even go to church. Only 1 or 2 of our people even goes to church on a regular basis. And so the conversations that we have and the relationships that I'm able to develop are out of this world. So I love working at Midas. So I serve as a chaplain at 3 Midas automotive stores. I'm a chaplain to a Christian service camp, which is a sister camp, of course, to Lake James. It's about 100 miles or so from here to Converse, Indiana, to where the Ark Christian Ministries is. Some of you know that place. It used to be called Rainbow Christian Camp. We're Ark Christian Ministries now. And I serve as the chaplain to the staff and to the interns there. So like one of the things I do every Tuesday morning is I go in and I lead devotions. We have interns that come as a part of that program too. And so in the off season, I spend a good portion of the rest of the day taking the interns around, seeing different things, doing different things with them. So chaplain to the staff at the Ark. And then, of course, I also have the gift of being with InterMission. So those are the 4 jobs that I have, and I'm sure we'll tell more about InterMission as we go on through this. I will tell you this much. You probably heard me say the other night, I teach Finding God in Culture, and I teach the Gospels, and I am the chauffeur for the group. So I drive as many thousands of miles as I possibly can in as few days as possible. So we try to get them all across the country to see what God's doing in different places and let them see how God might be calling them into ministry and giving them ideas of how they might be able to serve Jesus with the rest of their lives.
So you're currently doing 4 different jobs.
I am. So usually when people ask me, one of the things we like to do in America is we like to say, what do you do? And my answer is always, it depends on what day it is. And then if they go, well, what day is it? And then I can tell them and we can go further into it. And I try to explain what I'm doing, in less time than I just took. So sorry it took so long the first time.
No, that's okay. So when did you come to InterMission then?
Okay, this is interesting. I was actually hired to work for InterMission before Chris and Nisha were hired. What was funny was, I don't know if you know this or not, but ICOM had a program back in the early 2000s called Deeper. And basically it was the same thing as InterMission, but InterMission's a whole lot different now because Chris has been given some leeway to do some things differently, and it's fun to work with Chris and Nisha and to dream up new ways of loving students and loving Jesus and doing this stuff. And so it was funny. David Empson, the director of ICOM, had spoken with Bruce Cameron at the Ark Christian Ministries, and Bruce goes, you need to talk to Danny. And so I met with Dave, and I had no idea why I was meeting with Dave, okay? I thought we were going to talk about discipleship. And I'd just come up with this whole new concept for what a discipleship program should look like because I was finishing my master's degree at Cincinnati, rest in peace. And it was so, and I did get it. You know how I got my diploma just for the fun of it? I went to get my diploma, and they said, we can't find it. And I said, well, I did get one. He goes, I see you're supposed to get one. He said, if you'll stand right here, I'll print it right now and hand it to you. And I said, I'm not moving. So he did. He printed it fresh for me and even put it in a nice little folder and handed it to me. So anyway, I thought we were just going to talk discipleship. I thought we were going to talk dreams of what it would be like to love students and to help students walk like Jesus walked and love like Jesus loved and all those kinds of things. And we were at a Culver's, and we just had this conversation, and he looked at me and he goes, well, would you work for this amount of money? And I was like, what? I work for Bruce. I work for New Paradigm. I work for Midas. What do you mean? I had no idea that was coming. And so he ended up telling me, we went through a few weeks of, dreaming about that, praying about that, thinking about that. And then it was like, yeah, I would love to do this. And he asked me to come to a Bible study that was happening on Fridays at the ICOM office in Hazelwood, out beside Hazelwood Christian Church. And I was there one day, and he came up to me at this Bible study, and he goes, hey, we're going to interview the director and his wife for InterMission today. That's who's probably this is. Would you like to sit in on their interview? And I go, well, do they want me to sit in on their interview? And he kind of asked them on the spot. And Chris kind of looked at me and he went, sure, I guess, because, again, I'm that guy that doesn't look like a minister who's a minister. And he goes, and I went in and I sat down, and I'm telling you, it was 2 of the most awesome hours I've ever spent in my life because, I immediately fell in love with Chris and Nisha, and I just love who they are. And, I was involved in that whole conversation, and we just talked about what it would look like, and we dreamed about it. And, he asked me, he was like, what would you do if you could be a part of this? He says, what do you want to do? I said, I want to teach the Gospels. I want to teach Finding God in Culture because I don't think, we really know who Jesus is. We still have way too many people who have only second and third hand knowledge of Jesus, and we need to know the Jesus of the Scriptures. And then I looked at him and I said, and we need to learn how to go out into the world and use culture to minister to culture, and how to take the opportunity to build the bridges, because that's what a priest is, right? We're a kingdom of priests and holy nations. We're pontifexes. We're bridge builders. So we use what they already know to introduce them to Jesus. It's exactly what Paul did in Acts. When he, goes into Athens and he shows them an altar to an unknown God. And that's what I want to help people understand how to do. I want people to know the word and then be able to navigate the world.
Okay, so when you then came to Intermission, well, wait a minute here. Let me go back here to this interview.
Yeah.
So how did that interview turn out for you? Did Chris's attitude towards you change after the interview?
Well, no, it didn't. Thanks be to God. No, I think Chris was just, Chris and Nish are amazing. You guys know that. You've seen them, and some of you have worked with them on the field. And it was just, and you've heard Chris preach, for heaven's sake. I saw somebody shaking their head that talked about Chris preaching the other night. Chris and I were, God, I think God created us to work together. And so, in those moments, I'm just listening to him going, okay, I agree with that. I would do that way. Yeah, all right. And what's so funny is he's more introverted than I am. But I'm telling you, yeah, Janie said that, by the way. That was Janie, if you didn't hear the amen. But I'm telling you, his passion is unparalleled. And so, it was just, God has really blessed me to work with some wonderful men and women. And I'm so thankful that I get to serve alongside the people that I serve with. Because I'm telling you, I serve with fantastic people at New Paradigm. I serve with fantastic people at InterMission, spectacular people at Midas, and I serve with spectacular people at the Ark. I mean, what a gift. So yeah, no, we pretty much hit it off at the beginning. And, we've had one really good hitch in the giddy up. And I laughed so hard about that hitch in the giddy up now. It was just so wonderful because I'm going to tell you something. When you love somebody, you can have hitches in the giddy up because what you're committed to is coming through on the other side. And what a gift it is to be with people who love Jesus with all their heart, with all their soul, with all their mind, and all their strength, and their neighbor as much as they love themselves. That's my bosses, and that's the people I work with.
Yeah, and to me, that's the whole thing, is being able to know that there's differences in individuals, but yet being able to say they don't have to be like me. Mm-hmm. Of course, there's probably nobody out here who wants to be like me, right? Okay, we have one taker, but when he gets to know me, that will change. So, as you started work with InterMission, how do you juggle then time with InterMission? Is that the 4 months that you take off? And then how do you do that with all the different jobs that you face?
Yeah, it's really kind of interesting. So, like when I took the job with InterMission, I assumed that my job with the Ark was finished. And if you were to see my office at the Ark, it would look an awful lot like any place that I'm in because it's A, full of books, B, it's full of knickknacks, and C, you can't get much more in there. And so I was at, it'd been a few weeks. It was almost time for me to leave. It was probably about this time of year, and I was going to be leaving in a couple weeks. And I sat down with Bruce after I led devotions on the Tuesday morning, and I said, all right, man, I promise. I'm cleaning my office out this week. I'm going to clean it out. And Bruce looked at me and he said, why are you cleaning your office out? He said, how about you keep your office? And I mean, they have new people they have to hire. They have people that need offices. I said, you want me to keep my office? He goes, yeah, I want you to keep your office. He said, I apologize that it's an hour and a half from the city. And I go, please do not apologize that it's an hour and a half from the city. That's the only thing that saves my life sometimes. Is people call and I go, I'm sorry, I'm out of town. I'll be back in town tomorrow, And so anyway, because when you work 4 jobs, there's always a call and there's always a need and there's always, And so he told me that, and then he said, and we want to keep you on as chaplain to the staff. And I'm telling you, I was so blown away. So I miss that time with them. I'll get to see them at ICOM. I'll get to see them, when some of them will come to the campus. Some of our summer staffers actually go to school at Johnson, so I get to have meals with them. They come up to my house at night in the apartment because I'm actually in the dorm director's apartment in Old Clark Hall, the actual dorm I lived in. So they get to come up and I get to sit and eat with them, play games with them, talk to them about the kingdom. So there's still some type of connection there. Midas, they'll call me. If they need anything, I'm on the other end of the phone. I still owe them for lots of different people's cars that are being worked on. I have to call them and ask them to fix other people's cars. I'm like, hey, this friend of mine's having a real issue. I'm pretty sure they're going to need some brakes. Can you look at this and maybe help them out and hook them up with a little bit of brake work? And, so there's always still that conversation and those kinds of conversations. And if I come back this year, I have to come back for 3 weddings that I'm doing. I haven't done a wedding in forever, but I have 3 weddings. I'm speaking at a women's retreat. I'm preaching at a festival in a community. And so when I come back, I told my boss, I said, I'm going to do my best to stop by the stores, at least swing through and check on everybody and see how they're doing. So, you do some of that kind of stuff. And hopefully I get some chance to talk to some of the people at New Paradigm on occasion when I do that too. But I mean, mostly that 4 months I'll be gone and I will be focused on, trying to learn from the Gospels. You guys know this. The Word of God is living and active, sharper than any two-edged sword. Pierces even the dividing of soul and spirit, joints and marrow, judges the thoughts, intents, and attitudes of our heart. We're not supposed to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewal of our mind. Then we'll be able to test and prove what God's will is, His good, pleasing, and perfect will. And so what happens is you get into this stuff, and I go there, and I mean, I go to the library, I get new commentaries I haven't read, and I add that to the commentaries I already have. And all summer long, I've been buying new commentaries as I've preached from Matthew, Mark, and Luke, and John. One of them, $95 for a commentary on Kindle. I can't even prove to you I bought something, except for you look at it on my phone, and I paid $95 for Darrell Bock's, exegesis of Luke. And so I'm there to learn. I mean, that's one of the huge things. I love the fact that Chris presses this idea that we're a learning community. And so we're constantly learning. We're trying to grow. We're trying to develop. And I'm going to tell you something. If you out there who have been preaching the gospel, some of you might, I don't know if anybody from Pioneer Bible Translators is here. You guys are doing hero work. And I'm going to tell you something. I remember a Greek word here, a Greek word there. I'll cry about a Greek word every once in a while, but let me tell you something. I'm learning more Greek words. I'm learning more once used Greek words. I'm learning that compassion. I just taught our students over in the Family Life Center. Compassion only shows up 13 times. Splunk needs a eye. Jesus' gut was wrenched from them. It comes from the splanchna, the bowels. It's been my favorite verse forever from Matthew 9:35, but it shows up 13 times. 10 times it's a reference to Jesus. 3 times it's a reference to the person playing the role of the divine in one of Jesus' parables. And this is that constant thing. And so, I get that opportunity to seek and to study and to rest. I do dumb things with them too. I ask them to come in at 8 o'clock in the morning for bacon, blackberries, and BB King. I cook bacon. I play jazz music. I make espresso for everybody. And we just sit around and we rest in God's presence before we go down and we practice the Shema. And then, at 9 o'clock, I'm up to teach Gospels. On Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. And on Tuesday and Thursday evenings, I'm teaching Finding God in Culture for an hour and a half, hour and 45 minutes. And, so yeah, those months, I'm pretty much focused on that work. And then the driving across the country. You've never met anybody that loves a road trip more than me. And I love to meet people, and I love to eat. And so you get to combine those things with loving people deeper into a walk and a relationship with Christ. And how are you going to beat that?
Okay, so specifically in your job there, what do you have curriculum at InterMission that you use, or do you just let's open up here to this chapter, verse, or book today?
All right, so what we do, have you guys seen the ESV scripture journals? They are one of the greatest things that's ever been created. So basically you have text on one side and you have blank page on the other. It's actually not blank. There are some really light lines. And what we do is everybody gets a Matthew journal, a Mark journal, a Luke journal, and a John journal. And we spend 2 weeks going through each one of those Gospels. And they'll read 4 to 6 chapters before they come in, and they check. And their responsibility is to find their wows, their woes, and their waltzes, okay? So a wow is something that just stops you in your tracks and you just want to rejoice because you're so thankful that God has this listed for us in Scripture and that we were able to figure this out, okay? A woe is something that we need to stop and reflect on and do a little bit more research on. And now the waltz is a kind of funny one, okay? Because I learned that Jewish people, whenever they would read along and they would find something in the text that they did not know, they would get up and they would dance. Because there was still something that God was going to teach them that was beyond their comprehension. And so I asked them to read the text and find their wows, their woes, and their waltzes. And so what usually happens is a class will, I have all kinds of quotes. We try to teach them about wonder. That's one of the first things we'll come off the bat with, that we need to be people of wonder, people who live in awe of what God has done, what God is doing, and what God will do. And so we talk about these quotes at the beginning. We go from wonder to some different kinds of quotes after I get through all the wonder quotes. But then we do the wows, the woes, and the waltzes. And then I walk them through certain texts that are on my heart that morning that I believe are some texts that we need to spend some more time with that are in those chapters. And so we have that, and that usually lasts, like I said, about hour 15, hour 30 minutes. With Finding God in Culture, it's stuff that I've written. A lot of it grew out of Walt Mueller. I don't know if you know Walt. He wrote a book. He was the executive director, I think, of the Center for Parent-Youth Understanding. And Walt Mueller went to Acts 17, and he said, look, this is 3 responses to culture that I see that you can possibly have. And he goes through Paul's response to culture, and he tries to explain what a proper Christian response to culture should be. And so we talk about isolation, which is circle the wagons, and I asked the students, I said, is isolation a good way to minister to the world? Like if we hold ourselves off, if we circle the wagons around us and we put all our animals inside the Conestoga wagons and we stay in here hoping that, nobody will be able to break through our defenses, is that going to make a difference in the world? And they're like, no. Okay, all right, so isolation's bad, right? And they're like, yes, isolation's bad. And then I say the next one's accommodation. Accommodation, I usually break it down in an old rock and roll lyric, and some of you will know it. I like it, I love it, I want some more of it, okay? So it's this idea that, that all of culture is good and that there's nothing bad and I want it, just bring it on. Is that a proper response to culture? No. Culture is the soup we swim in. Some of it's negative, some of it's positive, okay? So we have to understand. So accommodation's not going to work. We can't just say bring it on because it's all good, because it's not all good. And then the last response is engagement transformation, okay? So we engage the culture and we work to transform the culture. But I'll be honest with you, one of the things I tell them is that God still writes in pagan pens. He still frames in pagan lenses, and he still sings in pagan verse. There's this wonderful poem, I'm Barefoot for a Reason. Some of you might be looking, man, I wish that guy put some shoes on. Well, I try to take them off as often as possible because Elizabeth Barrett Browning wrote an amazing stanza of a really long poem a long time ago. And this is what she said: earth's crammed with heaven, and every common bush afire with God. But only he who sees takes off his shoes. The rest sit round and pluck blackberries. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. Earth is crammed with heaven, and every last one of us knows that. Every one of us knows that every common bush is afire with God. Many of the rabbis believe that bush might have been on fire for a really long time and that Moses just didn't notice it. I don't know if that's necessarily true, but he did notice it. And when he saw this strange sight, he turned aside and he went to it. The bush then calls out his name. This bush that was burning but not consumed up, calls out his name. And after it calls out his name with this term of endearment concept, I believe, it basically says, you take off your shoes because the place where you're standing is holy ground, Kodesh Adamah. I believe all ground is holy. And so I want to take off my shoes. And I'm going to tell you something. I love blackberries. You're not going to find anybody who loves blackberries more than me. I like pie, I like jam, I like jelly. I like blackberries. But I don't want to be eating and feasting on blackberries when I could be feasting on the divine. God is still sending out messages. Sometimes they come from pagans. And sometimes pagans have a better understanding of God's love than we do. And I think that's sad. Jesus told a story, and it's the one I just got finished telling. It's why I'm wearing my Dear Theophilus shirt, my Luke shirt. Jesus told a story. There was a priest. He passed the guy. There was a Levite. He got a little bit closer than the priest, but he too went on by. And then he said that nasty word. And then there was a Samaritan. They hated Samaritans. And here's the Samaritan. Now, that's what's really funny is, I don't have time to go into that. Never mind. We can talk about the Samaritan later. But the idea is this beautiful thing that we can learn from those who are lost as well. I don't come in on a high horse. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory as of the glory of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. The end of Luke 14 says, let him who has ears hear. What does Luke 15:1 say? And all the tax collectors and sinners were gathering near to him. to listen to him. The tax collectors and sinners had ears to hear. How often do we not even have ears to hear? How often do we play the role of Pharisees, Sadducees, and Essenes? And so, so we go into that whole finding God in culture thing, and it's some basically we've written, and we basically use rock and roll in movies to show them opportunities to introduce people to Jesus. We want them to be able to recognize the altars to the unknown gods and be able to use them as open doors to show people the truth of why we all exist.
When you get to these journals, just something that I'm curious about, do you find that the first day of doing that, there's very little written, but as the days progress, more and more is written by the students into those journals?
Yeah, I think that happens, but I'm going to tell you what really happens is when you see kids, when you see students begin to light up. And you see students begin to start connecting the dots. And see, another thing that we've done that I think we've done a major disservice to the Gospels and to the text itself is we shoot from the hip in so many different texts, and we don't follow a text all the way through. And so when you start in chapter 1 and you start reading, like Chris preached on Mamzer the other night, and when you're preaching on Mamzer and you understand that there are all of these women with questionable sexual experiences in their life that sets up this woman named Mary, and then you're going to find out that there was a virgin who gave birth and who was with child and conceived, and that goes back to Isaiah chapter 7, and you start understanding Isaiah chapter 7, and Matthew has a fulfillment formula, and you start going, all right, but you got to go back and you got to understand why he's pulling these texts over here, and then you start seeing it, and you start understanding Jewish hermeneutics, and you start understanding the way that Eastern writers write. And it was different than the way Western writers write, and you start putting these things together, and you see these kids coming alive. Yeah, and more stuff is written, and they go, wait a minute, but that text happens here. If that text happened here, I was with my students, I was with our staff at the camp not too long ago, and we were talking about, Jesus going away and lamenting in one of the texts, and he goes, well, wait a minute. Didn't Jesus, in this text, he went away and lamented here? And what happened before each of those times that he goes away and he laments? And you start watching these kids start making connections, and they're helping you make connections. And I'm sorry. I mean, it's like Emeril Lagasse. It's bam, kick it up a notch. And then we're just going crazy, and you already see the passion that I have. And I mean, I'm going off for an hour and 15 minutes, and Chris is like, whew, and the kids go, it's time to eat lunch. And then I go and hide in my apartment for a little while and try to process even what I'm learning in that whole deal. So yeah, they do definitely grow and more comes. I mean, like how long have we looked at Luke and we forget that Luke is just a setup for Acts? I mean, Matthew writes, blessed are the poor in spirit for what? There's the kingdom of heaven, right? Luke says what? Blessed are the poor. Thanks, Luke. Theophilus is reading along. He gets to this point. If Theophilus is just one guy. He gets to this point. And as he gets to this point, he says, blessed are the poor. And then guess what? When he reads the second compendium, and when he reads the second book that he writes, he's going to find out that that everyone had everything in common and that no one had any need. And he's going, blessed are the poor. And you start seeing the way all of this connects, and it's just such a beautiful thing. And I mean, we get into those discussions about where does the Gospel of Mark end? Does the Gospel of Mark end in verse 8 or does it end in verse 20? Why would Mark write a book and end it in a verse about them being trembling and afraid and saying nothing to no one? Well, who's he writing to? If you understand who he's writing to, he could end a gospel there. Because it's a euangelion. And if it's a euangelion, then you have this. Anyway, sorry. But see, this is the kind of stuff we get to play with. And we just get to seek God through all of that. And sometimes we even get to go through all of those gospels again when we're on the road together. It just depends on how long the road works together, and we just have to do what we do with different groups. That's another thing I love about Intermission is we're constantly changing. And we're realizing, well, this works, this doesn't work, and so how can we make this, and how do we add this, and what do we need to take away to do that? Because the most important thing is fixing our eyes on Jesus, the author and the finisher of our faith, and running with running with perseverance the race that he has marked out for us.
So, how soon after the students arrive do they actually start leaving and you start going out into the community or to other areas?
Yeah, we're at Johnson for 2.5 months, but we will go out even during that time because Chris does some classes on signs and stories. One of the things Chris does is he gets them to this place, and we take them to the University of Tennessee and we drop them off, and they get to talk to people. But it starts on campus, which is a really cool and brilliant thing Chris does. He goes, all right, this is how you talk to people. This is how you listen to people. That's what we start out with. This is how you listen. And then this is how you make those connections and connect those bridges and have those conversations with people. And he says, all right, I need you to have those conversations with 3 people in the cafeteria. So they go down and they have a week to do these 3 conversations in the cafeteria. And then he goes, all right, guess what? Now you're going to go out into the community and you're going to do this. And then we'll also send them out to restaurants with food like they've never seen, never tasted, never heard of before. And they get to go to these restaurants and they have to have the experiences there. And they have to write about those as cross-cultural experiences. And so we have all of these kinds of things that are practices for them that get them ready for us going out on the road. And I want to tell you something. You want to talk about being exciting. We go out on the road and we have no idea where we're going to stay. We try to save as much money as possible. So we'll take any church pretty much that says we'll take you. And we go there and we've never met them. They've never met us. Those are those moments in which you show up and you're like, Sometimes the church goes, hey, this is the room you're staying in. Have a nice night. And sometimes they fix a meal for us. And they say, we'd love to hear about your program. And you watch all of the students as they come in and sit with different people at the meal. And then they stand up and everybody has an opportunity to share about what this program means to them and how they're learning to grow more, to become more like Jesus. And it's just so much fun. And we develop these relationships. One of the guys was a radio DJ, country music station in Tucumcari, New Mexico. Me and our young man from Zimbabwe walked into that country music radio station the next morning while he was on the air. Well, we're glad to have Danny and Josh with us this morning. And we got shout out and everybody out in the van, woo, and all this kind of stuff. And we listened to country music for the next hour. We've never listened to country music that long. And probably never will again. But anyway, I'm just saying, that's the way it happens.
So when you go to these churches, who do you send to the door first, you or Chris, and who has the best response for you to get in?
Okay, first of all, Chris is not usually with us because I'm usually the one driving, and I do pretty much all the driving except for Nisha usually drives 1 week. Okay, and so it's kind of funny that, I'll probably send the student first. Because, when they see me, they have no idea what's coming after that, and they don't, but the people are so gracious, and it is so wonderful. I mean, we've stayed in inner cities, we've stayed in small cities, we've stayed, in the burbs. I mean, we've stayed all kinds of places. And every once in a while we get a hotel, and those are great too.
Do we have any questions of anybody out there?
No, that was not what I meant by that. Chris knows, but we, as the team, we'll know what church we're going to, but we don't know those people. And so we have no idea what experience we're getting into. Yeah, no, Chris sets all that up, and actually last year he even had one of our apprentices taking care of it. So I didn't even I didn't even talk to the people, so I didn't know. Our apprentice would contact the organization, everything was that, and he goes, this is the person we're talking to. Every once in a while I might have to make a phone call, because I remember one time being in downtown Fargo, and we were having a hard time getting a hold of somebody, and I had to make a couple extra calls around the edge. But it's so wonderful. And that place at Tucumcari, we had one of the most wonderful worship experiences with them that night. And they stayed around, and they loved us so well. And they looked at us and they said, tomorrow morning we'll be here with breakfast for you guys. And this couple from that church went to McDonald's and bought us all of these Egg McMuffins. And we sat and had Egg McMuffins with them, and they just asked these students all these questions while we tried to load the van and put all of our stuff on top of the van and got ready to head out to our next destination. And what's really cool is we get to do some cool things on there too. We've gone to the Grand Canyon both of the last couple of years, and the Grand Canyon was amazing. I mean, just absolutely out of this world. We had an intellectually challenged student with us this past year, and poor guy got stuck with me at the Grand Canyon. And I want to tell you something. One of the best days of my life, because I've seen the Grand Canyon. I love the Grand Canyon. I'm still awed by the Grand Canyon. I'm still awed by nature. I'm still awed, and I live in wonder of what God does with every day, with people, with food, with all that kind of stuff, much less nature and a really big hole in the ground. And so I walked out with him, and I could not wait. I was like, but I didn't get my phone out of my pocket quite fast enough, because you should have seen his face when he saw it for the first time. And he walked to the edge, all the way up to the edge, probably closer than I wanted him to be. And he walked up to the edge and he goes, Danny, are you seeing this? Yes, I'm seeing it. He goes, this is amazing. We should live here. And I go, yes, we should live here. I would love to live here. And it was just so awesome. And then, I'm taking pictures, I'm taking video, I'm sending it to his parents. And then we're walking, and we will laugh when we get to heaven. We'll be laughing about that day. He'll go, you remember what you said to me on that bus? I go, oh, I remember what I said to you on that bus. I remember why I said it to you too.
Now, okay, another question.
Yeah, I'm sitting here, I noticed, we've known each other for a while. You're talking about you don't wear shoes, you're driving the van, you're taking it everywhere. I want to know, do you have the gas pedal with the little toes and everything like that to clear for the keys? I grew up in that area. I'm just curious, does it matter? Yeah, well, you know what? I think we should probably buy one of those, but we do not have that in the van. I would definitely do it. I would definitely do it, Dwayne. No doubt about it. All right, okay. Hey, let me tell you something. You give me one of those, I'll put it in, I'll send you pictures. It'll get on the webpage. There you go.
If I could ask one last question here to wrap things up. You're working with students, but how would you apply that to those of us who are older?
Can I tell you something? This is one of my dreams. Some of you out there are retired. I really believe we need retired people to come into this program with us. Either the 2.5 months at Johnson, or while we're on the road. Because I'm going to tell you something. I love Jesus, and I'm a crazy wild man who loves Jesus. And you know what? I don't do a very good job of that. I'm trying to love him more today than I loved him yesterday. We teach them the Shema. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength. It's an adverb. Okay, we don't have time to go into that. And you got to love your neighbor as much as you love yourself. And I'm trying every day to become more like Jesus. But I want to tell you something. We need people who have walked the path longer than I have, who can love them more effectively than I can love them, who can show them what it looks like to love Jesus on the other side of wild and crazy, or what wild and crazy looks like at 70. Because let me tell you something, we should be chasing Jesus with reckless abandon. Mike Yaconelli was one of my heroes. And he wrote Dangerous Wonders so many years ago. And he talked about this unpredictable Jesus. If we really love this unpredictable Jesus, and if we're really chasing after this Jesus who wants us to have life and have it abundant, if we want to follow this God who can do immeasurably more than all we could ever dare to ask, guess, hope, request, or imagine, and he wants to do that in us, it's not in us individually. We have so messed up the church by making everything so individual. It's the community, and we need older people, younger people, youngest people. We need the whole realm. We need the whole kit and caboodle. We need the whole spectrum so that we can understand what it looks like to really love Jesus, to love him well, and to love him well throughout all of our lives. And so one of my dreams is to see some older people come around us and teach me as well as our students, because it is the community. And I want to tell you something. We are a learning community, and we believe that when we have been baptized into Christ, that our allegiances change and that our community changes and that the body of Christ matters. And so that's my quick answer. I've got a lot more to that. I've got a lot more to all of this, as you can tell, because I talk a lot. And I apologize if I've gone too far afield for you. If I have, just come and talk to me. And I promise I won't talk your ear off, but I would love to keep chasing Jesus. That's what I want to do. All that matters is Christ and his kingdom. So may his kingdom come here on earth, even as it is in heaven.
Okay. Well, thank you very much, Danny. We're going to take a few minutes to get ready for our next session.